Do Orthodox Christians and Catholics worship images of Jesus Christ with latria, the highest form of worship? This is a stumbling block for many Protestants because they don't want to commit idolatry. And if someone tells them to give latria, this highest form of worship, to an image, that certainly feels and sounds like idolatry to their ears. So we'll be investigating this question today to answer whether or not latria is appropriate to give to images of Jesus. This video is also in response to the YouTube channel Anglican Aesthetics, where he reports that he recently changed his mind on icon veneration, specifically on this point. So I want to confront that question as well and give some alternative resources and hopefully can persuade him back into venerating icons in a healthy and orthodox manner. If you find this topic interesting, hit that subscribe button for future content like this. And if you find it helpful, hit that like button. Without any further ado, let's get right into it. So you've heard before that we venerate icons. We don't worship them. And this distinction is very important because it keeps us from crossing the line into idolatry. Now, of course, Jesus is worthy of worship because he is the Son of God, God incarnate. Now, if you put these two things together, you might find yourself in a very difficult dichotomy. On one hand, if we only venerate the image of Jesus, then we're venerating him. We're not worshiping him to the full extent that he is due. But on the other hand, if we do worship him in his icon, then we're giving latria to or towards a material thing, which just seems very wrong. So which one of these two practices do we go with? Do we deny Jesus' worship, or do we worship a material thing? Should we be worshiping images of Jesus? Well, interestingly, Thomas Aquinas answers the question with the answer yes. He says, on the contrary, Damascene quotes Basil saying the honor given to an image reaches to the prototype, that is the exemplar, but the exemplar itself, namely Christ, is to be adored with the adoration of latria, therefore also his image. So Thomas Aquinas is arguing that when honor is given to an image of somebody, the honor passes to the prototype. Therefore, if you give latria to the image, the latria also passes to the prototype. This is the framework for his argument. This is very shocking to certain Protestants' ears. And I understand the shock because latria is the highest form of worship. And Thomas Aquinas is basically, he's taking the brakes off of worship and saying you can go full on latria to an image of Jesus because that latria will go to Jesus, not to the image itself. Now, logically, this technically seems to check out, right? Because he avoids accusations of idolatry by clarifying that no reverence is shown to Christ's image as a thing, and distinguishes between two movements of the mind. Okay, so there's the image, the physical material thing, the icon, and then there's the image of a person on the icon, and there's a movement towards the thing, the physical material image, and then there's a movement towards the person whose image is on the icon. So he's saying with regards to the thing itself, we are not giving latria, but to the person who's depicted, we are giving latria. This is the idea behind what he's saying. But the problem with this is it does lose some stability when taking it to other logical conclusions. What about the cross, right? If the cross is a symbol of Christ, then we should be worshiping the cross as well. And he comes to that conclusion also. And then what about people? Because the Bible describes people as images of God. Should we be worshiping people as well with latria? So these are some problems that come up if you take this to the extreme logical conclusions. Now, very interestingly, the Seventh Ecumenical Council, the Council of Nicea II, answers this question with no, actually disagrees with Thomas Aquinas on this point. The fathers of Nicea II were much more careful about talking about veneration of icons and worship of God, and they never at any point sanctioned giving latria to images, even images to Christ. In fact, they specifically said that icons were not to receive latria. So this is an excerpt from their horos, the definition, the final conclusion of their council, and they say the following. It says, they, that's images, are to be accorded greeting, aspasmon, and the veneration of honor, timitikin proskinisin. not indeed the true worship, Latrian, corresponding to our faith, which pertains to the divine nature alone, but in the same way as this is accorded to the figure of the honorable and life-giving cross, to the holy gospels, and the other sacred offerings. In their honor, timin, an offering of incensation and lights is to be made, in accordance with the pious custom of the men of old. For the honor, timin, paid to the image passes over to the prototype, and whoever venerates the image venerates in it the hypostasis of the one who is represented. So what are they saying here? They're saying that images, icons, including images of Christ, are to be given greeting, aspasmon, typically expressed with a kiss, and to be given the veneration of honor, timitikin proskinisin, but not to be given latria. Right? It uses the negative word not indeed the true worship, latrian, corresponding to our faith. Latria is reserved for the divine nature alone, not images. This is the Horos of Nicea II. It's exactly what it says. Now, this council is of the highest authority in the Orthodox Church, and even in the Catholic Church, a far higher authority than Thomas Aquinas. So if, theoretically, this is contradicting Thomas Aquinas, this trumps what his opinion is on the matter, even from a Catholic perspective. So Thomas Aquinas is not considered infallible, right? So he can err on certain points. So Catholics can take a look at Thomas Aquinas, take a look at Nicea II, and determine for themselves whether or not there's a disagreement. If there is a disagreement, Catholics are obligated to go with the Nicea II against Thomas Aquinas. So it's very important to put into perspective the goalpost. The goalpost is Nicea II, not Thomas Aquinas. And especially if you're not Catholic, right? He's a Catholic saint. If you're Anglican, Protestant, or if you're Orthodox, Thomas Aquinas, you can respect him, you can agree, or you can disagree with him. So he's not a high authority for non-Catholics, and even for Catholics he's not infallible. So I would say the fact that Nicea II is saying this already trumps anything, to the contrary that you would find anywhere else, because this is a very high authority for Orthodox and for Catholics. But I think it's very important to note here that it does say that images, including images of Christ, that's the context, you can read the whole definition if you'd like, they're to be given the veneration of honor, timitikin proskinisin, not latrian. Very important. So another important point from this definition is it compares the veneration of icons to the veneration of the cross and the Gospels and other sacred objects. So this is very important because it means the nature of veneration given to images of Jesus is of the same kind as given to other objects. It's very important. It doesn't get a special kind of worshipful veneration. It gets a similar nature of veneration of honor, just like the other objects get. It's very important. And Nicea II teaches that only the divine nature receives latria in the Trinity. And there are no exceptions that it makes for images of Christ. So it doesn't say that icons are to be given a veneration of honor, except for images of Christ, which you should give latria. It doesn't say that. It seems to be teaching that images, even images of Christ, are to be given veneration of honor. Now, Anastasios of Antioch, who is speaking at the Seventh Ecumenical Council, agrees with its Horos, and the council agrees with him, and he says that veneration, using the word proskinisis, is an expression of honor, but in no way worship, latrevin. So veneration, proskinisis, which is given to icons, is not latria. That's what the Seventh Ecumenical Council is teaching. So the fathers of Nicea II took proskinisis as an expression of honor, not an act of latria, even for images of Jesus. So it's very important. This is the highest authority in the Orthodox Church and among the highest authorities in the Catholic Church as well, higher than Thomas Aquinas himself. And the fact that it's saying this, I think, is very, very important. Now, what about St. John of Damascus? Well, St. John of Damascus is very relevant because the Seventh Ecumenical Council stamps him with approval. It calls him venerable, worthy of credence. It says that he is a herald of truth. It wishes him eternal memory. and says, may we receive the gift of following their discourses, and they're including John of Damascus. So he's stamped with the approval of an ecumenical council, and he teaches the exact same thing that Nicea II taught. In his 3 treatises on the divine images, he never at any point taught to give latria to images of Jesus. He taught to give latria to God by nature, the nature of God, just like the Horos of Nicea II said, to give latria to the Trinity alone, and he uses the word alone there, to give Jesus's image respect, veneration, honor, and greeting, just like the Horos of Nicea II said. And it's the same kind of honor, veneration, and greeting that's given to saints. This is very interesting. So even though we give Jesus latria by virtue of his divine nature to his image, we give a veneration of honor. That's the distinction that the Fathers of Nicea II and St. John of Damascus are making. Okay. Now you might get mad about that if you think, if you agree with Thomas Aquinas, but I'm just the messenger, right? I'm just showing you what John of Damascus taught, what the Seventh Ecumenical Council taught. You can look at the sources yourself. So he distinguishes between the veneration of latria, it's called latreivtiki proskinesis, and the veneration of honor, timitiki proskinesis. Now, the latreivtiki proskinesis is that one that he assigns to the nature of God, to the Trinity. But that timitiki proskinesis is the one that he assigns to images, including images of Jesus. So that distinction is very real, the distinction of latria to the divine nature and the Trinity versus the veneration of honor that's given to icons. And he does use the word alone in this formulation when he's talking about giving worship to the Trinity. Now, Orthodox tradition has maintained this teaching, and this is shown in the Confession of Dositheus, which says the exact same thing about veneration to icons of Jesus. And it even goes further and excommunicates and anathematizes people who give latria to icons. It says the following: since it giveth us most plainly to understand that it behooves to adore, and uses the word prosevkin. So this is proskinesis. Don't get caught up on the English word. They're using proskinesis just like the Seventh Ecumenical Council did. The holy icons, and what have been mentioned above, and anathematizes and subjects to excommunication as well all those that adore the icons with latria. And in Greek, the where this was written, the Synod in Jerusalem in 1672, he says proskinuntas latreivtikos, okay, proskinesis of latria, veneration of latria, as well as those who say that the Orthodox commit idolatry and adoring the icons. We also therefore do anathematize with them such as adore either saint, angel, or icon, or cross, or relic of saints, or sacred vessel, or gospel, or aught else that is in heaven above, or aught on the earth, or in sea, with latria, latreivtikos. And we ascribe adoration with latria to the only God in Trinity. And we anathematize those that say that the adoration, proskinesin, of icons is the latria of icons, and who adore them not, and honor not the cross and the saints as the church has delivered. It doesn't get any clearer than that, an outright denial that we give latria to icons. Again, there is no distinction between icons of Jesus and icons of Mary, saints, angels, and so on. There's just a blanket statement that latria does not go to icons. It's just reiterating what Nicea II taught and what St. John of Damascus taught, the legacy of the Greek Fathers, the ecumenical councils. So how did Thomas Aquinas end up with a different conclusion than the Fathers of Nicea II, St. John of Damascus, and the Confession of Dositheus? Well, I'm not here to pick on Thomas Aquinas or to say that he's stupid or something like this. I have a lot of respect for Thomas Aquinas, but there are some real reasons why he may have ended up in a different conclusion. As far as I know, he did not speak Greek. So when he was reading the Acts of Nicea II and reading St. John of Damascus, he was reading them in Latin. And so he may have had a faulty translation. And this is very, very likely because Latin has a notorious history of mistranslating Greek. The vocabulary for veneration and worship in Greek does not correspond well to the language of worship and veneration in Latin. So this is one of the major reasons why the Franks initially rejected the Council of Nicaea II, because the language was shocking to their ears and sounded like idolatry. But it really has to do with the difference in these two languages. So it's important to keep in mind that when Nicaea II was written, it was written using Greek, and the argumentation is very much centered around and conforming to the way that the Greek language works with veneration and worship. And that being said, it doesn't always translate well into Latin. So here's an example. This is an excerpt from the Horos of Nicaea II in Latin, and this is from Gruder's edition. And you can already see right away it's much more confusing than the Greek. We have in one part it says that we venerate the images, and another part it says that we adore the images. So what do we adore them or do we venerate them? What's the difference? It's very unclear. There's inconsistency in the words that are being used. In one place, it says that we don't give true latria, and it transliterates the word latria. Latria is not a word that's native to Latin, so it's very up to definition, depending on who's defining it in different places, different times. It's very easy to mess up when reading these texts in Latin. Of course, in Greek, it's very, very clear. Latria is service to God alone. Proskinesis of latria is a kind of bowing and divine service to a god. Then there's the veneration of honor, which is to a person or a saint. That's for the icons. Everything's very neat and clean in the original Greek, but the Latin, it can be very murky, and the meanings can vary a lot depending on who's translating it, who's interpreting it, and so on. So we need to give Thomas Aquinas a break on this, because he's trying to read these things in Latin and understand the principles behind them through sometimes very foggy lens. Now, another point to draw out here is that the logic doesn't necessarily follow in his argument, because the basis of his argument was St. Basil's quote that the honor paid to the image passes over to the prototype. But the quote does not say that divine service paid to an image passes over to the prototype. So this could also be a distinction where the Fathers of Nicaea II diverged from Thomas Aquinas' logic and ended up in a different conclusion. Now, what is the current Catholic position? Well, it seems that this point was disputed in certain places at certain times. Maybe it still is. The Catechism of the Catholic Church quotes from Thomas Aquinas when talking about veneration of images, but it leaves out the key parts related to this discussion about giving latria to images. And this is probably intentional, because the Catholics who wrote the Catechism of the Catholic Church were probably trying to avoid these technical debate topics and to distract from the main points that they were trying to make. But I think it's very interesting. You can see when they're quoting from Thomas Aquinas, they're only quoting from parts that avoid that question of whether or not latria goes to images of Jesus. But I think very interesting, in its own words, it seems to agree with Nicaea II against Thomas Aquinas. So while it agrees with Aquinas that the veneration passes to the prototype, it makes that point very clear. In its own words, it seems to agree with Nicaea II against Thomas Aquinas. And it says the following. This is its own words. It says the Christian veneration of images is not contrary to the first commandment, which proscribes idols. Indeed, the honor rendered to an image passes to its prototype, and whoever venerates an image venerates the person portrayed in it. The honor paid to sacred images is a respectful veneration, not the adoration due to God alone. It's a very key phrase, and that's in their own words. Religious veneration, and this is a quote from Thomas Aquinas, is not directed to images in themselves, considered as mere things, but under their distinctive aspect as images, leading us on to God incarnate. The movement toward the image does not terminate in it as image, but tends toward that whose image it is. So according to the Catholic Catechism of the Catholic Church, the official teaching of the Catholic Church is that veneration of honor is to be given to the images, or veneration of respect, and that veneration of respect passes to the person who's depicted, not to the icon itself. It doesn't say anything about giving latria to images of Jesus. So I think that's very interesting. Again, Catholics can work out among themselves what they want to believe on that. I'm just the messenger here. This is what the CCC says. Now, as far as the Orthodox position, the Orthodox must follow Nicea II above all else, and St. John of Damascus, whom it affirms. Okay, in other words, we have to believe what our fathers taught, that icons are accorded greeting and the veneration of honor, not latria, exactly as the definition of Nicea II taught. The Seventh Ecumenical Council, St. John of Damascus, the Confession of Dositheus are all in agreement that latria, including that latrevtiki proskinesis, is for the divine nature in the Trinity alone. Icons, even of Christ, are to be given greeting and the veneration of honor, okay, not the latria. Honor paid to the image passes to the prototype, not acts of latria. So for Anglican aesthetics, because this is a big blocker for him, I would like to just reassure him and say, hey, the highest authorities in the Orthodox Church do not teach to give latria to images of Jesus. In fact, it says not to give latria to icons. Again, I'm just the messenger, but again, feel free, everybody, to just look at the resources yourself, see what they're saying, come to your own conclusions. If you found this video helpful, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button for future content on iconography, early Christianity, or biblical topics. Thank you for watching, and if you have any questions, leave a comment below. I love hearing from you, and I'll see you next time.